Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm excited to introduce you to Redding Grange Master Elizabeth Jensen. She's going to be sharing with us a little bit about the history of the National Grange, and also the Redding chapter. I've always been so curious about that building on Newtown Turnpike. So tonight we'll get our questions answered. We do ask that you think of your questions throughout the program, but we will wait until the end to take your questions, and then you can unmute yourself and ask questions and maybe share some tales yourself. We are recording tonight's program, so if someone you know isn't able to be with us, it will be on the library's YouTube channel in about a week or two. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I wanted to just preface this by saying that my presentation is literally hot off the press, made specifically just to talk with my brethren in Redding. It is not the most beautiful PowerPoint you've ever seen, but I think it's going to be a fun way to help us talk together a little bit about the journey that myself and a group of Redding residents have been on for the last year. So I'm really delighted to talk with you. I'm going to share my screen if the technology gods are with me. Can you all see my screen?
Looks good. Yes.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to add is, and I think it pops up, I am not a Grange expert, and I must admit that I'm a little intimidated to be talking in this town in particular, because I know that there's such a depth of knowledge about so many pieces of history, and I guarantee you there are people that know more about this particular topic than I do, but I'm going to tell you all what I know and a little bit what's been going on in our town as it relates to the National Grange in the last year. So the story really starts, I have a home on Sport Hill Road. I've lived there for 10 years, and I have driven by this little building on Newtown Turnpike for probably a decade, and I never knew what it was. And I used to peep in the windows, and I saw a bunch of boxes, and I could kind of see a stage. And I always had a curiosity about this building. And as we know, in this town, there's not a lot of places to meet. There's not a sort of, great places to swing in and right in the center of town. So there's a little bit of the creative piece in me that always just sort of was very interested in this building. And I'm telling this as sort of a preface for this journey and how I'm sitting here with you all today. So I ended up calling the real estate agent. The building went on sale. I popped up. I still had my Zillow notifications in my email. And one day this little face that I recognize, this building's face, popped up. And my heart leapt. I don't know why, and this was right when COVID was really in full force, and lots of people moving into Redding. What did they say? Half of New York or half of Brooklyn moved into Redding and during those, months. And I just, I dreaded a little bit because the odds of this little building making it out alive of a sale during COVID was not great. And so I called the real estate agent and said, I don't know why I'm calling you. I just feel compelled to call about this little building. And, I, in my regular job, work for a national animal welfare organization. So I work for a nonprofit. And I think in my head, I thought, well, maybe if the sellers, would give terms, could I, take out a loan and raise some money to buy this, to have an adoption center for animals? I don't know what I was going to do with it. I just felt compelled to call. And so the real estate agent told me that this was a Grange hall and that the state Grange owned it and that they didn't want to sell it. And they said to me, if you start a local chapter of the Grange, they give you the building. So I said, okay. And that's what brings me here today. It really was the beginning, one step that leads into a journey, a lifetime journey, actually. And that's really how it all got started. So what does anyone do this day and age when they have questions is they start to Google to say, what is the Grange, right? So you'll see the picture of the building. The upper right-hand picture is they cleaned it out. This is when they were getting ready for it to sail. And that's me. I took a picture of myself to send it to the people, these disembodied voices of the state Grange, to let them know that I was trying to help this building. And what I found, and this is really, again, general information that I had found online, but this is really what I started reading just to make sure that this wasn't some kind of cult that I was getting involved in. Because, you know, you hear about these historic organizations. And really what the Grange is, the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry, it's a fraternal society. And this was started in 1867. And it was a time when there were a lot of these fraternal organizations. You had the Odd Fellows and you had the Freemasons and many of these things that were there. And so it really started to help farmers. So it was a time when touring the farms, there was a lot of things that had happened in 1867 where farms were struggling. There was also a lot of activation from the railroads, where the railroads started coming through and they started, you know, taking over lands that belonged to the farmers. So what happened was this organization started to band the farmers together to work towards their protected interests. And they basically ripped off the Freemasons a little bit in a very cordial, sharing way. So there is a lot of that ritual that happened back then. You know, there is within Grange history, there's a position called the gatekeeper. And the gatekeeper is one of the 13 roles. It was literally a man that stood at the door of the halls of the meetings to make sure that there weren't any spies from the railroad coming to see what the Grangers were up to if they were working against the odds, you know, against purposes of the railroads. And so there's degrees of membership. If you ask me a lot about the degrees, I can't tell you a lot about them because we're only at the 4th degree. But what I can tell you is that much of the history and much of the ceremony from the Grange all relates to the 4 seasons. And the first 4 degrees are related to spring, summer, fall, and winter. And there's learnings and symbols that are associated with all of them. The meetings used to be private. They're no longer private. Ours are recorded and they're on Zoom. You know, they're on our website. But there's a lot of those traditions that have held. And what you found is through the years, I think less than 2% of our national population are farmers now. So through the years, the National Grange has really pivoted to become more community organizations. So they do lots of things within the communities. And one of the things that I found is, in some way, it's a little bit of a lump of clay. And that was part of the appeal for our town is they want the local chapters of the Granges to be responsive to the needs of their local community. And for us, there were a few needs that we identified pretty quickly. So really fun facts. Again, don't laugh at the slides, please, but some famous Grangers, Norman Rockwell, Eleanor Roosevelt. One of the things that appealed to me also was that considering it was started in 1867, women had equal standing right off the bat. And in fact, to this day, there are 4 positions. Actually, they may have changed it. I think men can hold these roles now, but back then there were 4 leadership roles that only women were allowed to hold because it was so their importance within the agricultural and their leadership in that was important, and they wanted to make sure that that was honored. I found our little Grange Hall. This was her when she was young and spry. We were the 15th in the state. We were one of the earliest Granges. The hall itself was dedicated in 1914, but our Grange chapter actually started in 1875. I was texting back and forth and emailing and messaging with some folks from the Historical Society. There was references to, and I'll put this question out there in case anybody can answer it at the end, but there were references in the material I was reading last night that prior to 1914, the Grangers were meeting in a building called Redding Ridge Hall in town. And I'm trying to figure out exactly where that was. There's some feeling that it was in the corner near on Cross near the Episcopal Church. But it would be really interesting to see if we could locate exactly where that building was. I'm sure many of the people know the Sanford family here. Their name is all over and in every cemetery scattered throughout Reading. And many living members, I'm sure. I'm laughing because they donated the land, which is a little less than a quarter acre. And I kept thinking to myself, you couldn't have donated just a little more so we could have had a decent parking lot. But I'm sure at the time it was a very happy thing. There were articles about how they tried to make a deal with the local churches to see if they could build something on their land. I never found the end of that piece of article, but they ended up building their own in 1914. And the timber that was used to build the hall was donated by Henry and Stephen Sanford. Fun fact we found after we got started, for anyone who knows Bill Hill in town, from Worup's, his great grandfather was actually the first master of Redding Grange. And it's been reorganized at least 3 times. There were a bunch of Granges that started right when the National Grange started in our, in Connecticut. Most of them folded within 2 years. They didn't get traction. And then they got revitalized again. I think from what I'm reading, there may have been one more reorganization in there, but I got to do a little more research. So we'll see. But it's been at least 3 times that this little, Cosa Nostra almost evaporated, and there was always some group of people that came and grabbed the torch and moved it forward. It's really been a compelling story. Fun facts, in the early 1900s, Redding Grange had their own theater troupe. And it's really funny to look back in the old articles and see them talking about what the Redding Grange is performing at the same time we're reading about Mark Twain's daughter over in Europe, all in the same article. Just lots of different kinds of events. There was a very close tie with our Boy and Girl Scout troop. The reason it's number 15 is because Redding Grange number 15 was the first one to charter them, I think in 1951, if I recall. And also involved in a scrap metal drive during World War II, which was really effective. Just some interesting things, again, that I found, and these are hard to read. If anybody wants copies of this afterwards, just email me and I'll send you so you can actually read it. But this was a really interesting article because in this article, in 1909, in a newspaper called the Bridgeport Time and Evening Farmer, there was an article that talked about Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan, who apparently had gotten married. It talks about that in this, going to visit Mark Twain, and how Helen Keller was able to find Mark Twain out of a group of people and immediately walk up to him and introduce herself. And the next paragraph of Reading News of general interest to the readers was a performance at Redding Grange. So it's just really fun to see how long this history goes back and how it was so intertwined with some of our notable folks. This was an article in 1912. This is where they were talking about the half-acre tract on the turnpike owned by the Sanfords and how they were trying to make a deal to try and build this other places. And if not, this was kind of their default. This was an interesting one that I just saw last night, and it's in 1914. So this was an article that talked about when they were opening and having an inauguration for their new hall, there was a car accident on the way in 1914, and a truck spun off of, I'm trying to see where it was, but it was Bethel residents that were coming. And I think it was on Sunset Hill. The bus that carried them spun off the road, and there was like, one injury, but they went on with the proceedings back in 1914. So that's kind of, and some of that information came to me later, but really it was just a matter of gathering information about what is this building and what do we have to do? So when I ended up finally speaking to the State Grange, what they told me that we had to do was, and I kept thinking, what's the catch? But what they said was we needed to find a minimum of 13 members to sign back up again. that once we did that, we would need to, and we needed 13 because there are 13 historic officer positions. And then once we had them, we would be going through some kind of ceremony in order to get our charter back. And I kept thinking to myself, all I need to do is find 13 people and you're going to give me this building. But easier said than done. But yes, that was the principal idea, that these buildings need a minimum cohort in order to keep active these chapters. What I found, and this is in full confession, there was a time where I just kind of was thinking to myself, do I really want to be involved in this National Grange? I really just want this building. Is it possible to maybe get one without the other, you know? And what I found through doing some reading, there was a lot of hubbub in the state of California about these buildings, where communities that had them historically basically wanted to annex from the Grange and just take them over as community centers. And there were a lot of court battles over it. And what it turns out to be is that these Grange halls are basically born with a birth certificate that makes them a Grange hall. And when those chapters dissolve, they default back to the state and the National Grange. So unless the state Grange or the National Grange puts them up for sale, you can't have one without the other. That's the deal for the building. So, and I'm really glad that that I didn't do that, because I have to tell you, it's been one of the most rewarding and interesting years of my life going on this journey. So, and they were talking about this charter. You got to get the charter back. You get the building when you get the charter. And I figured the charter is some kind of incorporation status that they need, you know, us to have these 13 people to reincorporate. And the local chapters are actually incorporated separately. They are their own LLC that are under the umbrella of the state and the National Grange. And so now I kind of had my marching orders, and I started holding meetings in town, and I started doing some surveys, because, you know, everybody wants a building, but do we have a critical mass in town to actually create an organization, right? It's different than 10,000 people wanting a building and everybody wanting it for something different, than actually knowing that you have a cohort that can make a go of functioning organization. And so I started doing these surveys, really just trying to find out what are the common denominators that we have in our town. And this was based on people that were raising their hands because they were interested in this building. And one of the things that came across, the top 3 things, which are no surprise, and probably one of the reasons that are the ties that bind us here as a community, is the preserved open space was the #1 thing that people chose. Our shared sense of community and our appreciation of history, those were the top things. It's funny, Elaine, that there's another page to this where I surveyed, is like, is there anything else that you really love about here? And the Mark Twain Library was listed. So kudos to you. So with this, and knowing that these things, an appreciation of history, community, were all, you know, all tied back to really what the Grange is supposed to be, I started to really feel confident that we might actually have something here, because this is the crux of what the Grange is to begin with. And there was a lot of synergy between that and the members of our community that we're self-selecting, honestly, to be part of this, but it was enough that I thought we had some traction. So then comes the fun part. So I'm getting all these signatures, Julia Pemberton. I'm like, could you just sign this piece of paper? She's like, I mean, it wasn't that. She had some familiarity with the Grange, but our town administrators, you know, Alice Smith and Julia, I didn't know many people in town prior to this. You know, I worked from sun up to sundown. I was commuting prior to COVID. And so it wasn't that I could call 13 neighbors. So it really was a matter of just putting myself out there and saying, hey, anybody, you want to become involved? And so they were really, really, really helpful in putting me, I didn't know who Bill Hill was. I didn't know who Lori Heiss was. And so they really helped make those connections to get some traction. Susan Clark, some of people that, you know, have really been backbone folks in the town that helped me connect with other people. And so the date comes and we're going to have this welcome ceremony that they called it. I didn't know what it was. I was basically inviting 50 of my community members to come into a hall, including our first selectman, and having no idea what was about to happen. And I have to say, it was one of the scariest moments of my life. So I go in, and I have to tell you, and there's some people on this call that were at this on November 6th last year. And it was really, really interesting. I've gone on eBay and I purchased some books from that cover these ceremonies, manuals from the 1860s and 1870s. And what happened in that building was exactly what's been happening in our town for over 125 years. And it definitely felt like the passing of some kind of baton, or seeing a language being spoken before it died out. And so was it a little anachronistic to have a sash on and, hear about the sheaths and it was, but it was definitely a feeling that, that we were experiencing something very special together. And on the right, you'll see a picture of me holding the actual charter. So that is one of the 2 charters that I know for sure is out there. That one's dated 1906, actually, come to think of it. I'm gonna look into that. It's dated 1906. And I had always thought that the charter was simply a status of incorporation, or, I didn't realize that the charter was actually a thing that they were going to hand me to hang on the wall. I'd been chasing this charter and then found out that it was actually a thing in a frame. So that was a bit of an aha moment, but it really was a terrific experience. If we are able to, we're going to try and pull together a 1-year anniversary and invite some of the State Grange folks to come down, because there's a ceremony for new members and we haven't been doing that. So we thought it would be a great thing to sort of do this once a year to kind of anniversary this real historical moment. And there's another picture. So the picture on the left, it's kind of grainy, but it literally shows the setup of those 13 officers. So the 3 at the front are the 3 graces. Those are 3 of the positions to be held by women, in addition to the lady assistant steward. So it's Ceres, Pomona, and Flora. And they have, flowers that they hold, a bowl of fruit, and I think it's wheat is the 3rd thing. And if you see the picture on the right-hand side, it's harder to tell because not everybody's in their spots, but the hall is still set up exactly the same way when they have their meetings. And it's supposed to be that every time you have a monthly meetings, and some Granges still do that. And there we are. There is the group of folks from Bill Hill shining in the middle, and you'll see some familiar faces there. Kathy Smeriglio is our treasurer. She's on the right-hand side, and she literally walked up on me while I was peeping in this window of this hall saying, I don't know, I got to start some organization to save this building. And she just said, I'll help you. So it really was, it was really a terrific experience. And there's everyone. So we needed 13 and we started with 33. What I didn't include in here were pictures of some of the work that we've done since then. They are on our Facebook page. And I would love to be able to share them more broadly. But since then, membership have made a new sign for us hanging in the front. We have, for anybody that's driven by, we have these beautiful, what do they call the thing? Troughs, farm troughs that have flowers and pumpkins in them now. And so little by little, we're bringing the old girl back online with some group work. So what's next? This is a picture from an award. So Redding Grange was apparently the hot tamale at the Danbury Agricultural Fair for many years. We were known as the kids on the block to beat. This is a picture of one of our award-winning displays in 1971. And I think it's charming, and there's still a little bit of that. You'll probably see at our upcoming agricultural fair, but the reality is, the National Grange membership has been dropping off, and Granges have been struggling. They've been closing all over the country, and certainly here in the Northeast. Since I've been around, I know of several that have closed within the last year. Bridgewater was actually had to be demolished because there were issues with that building and there just was no way to save it. And so, I think you look at this picture and you can appreciate a lot of what it says, but I think we all understand that, if this is all that the Mark Twain Library had to offer, you probably wouldn't have the membership that you have now. And so part of the work that we're doing now is, you have this historic organization that is really fighting to retain its character and its uniqueness. And how do we modernize that and make it relevant? And that's really where we are today in our work. So, challenges and workarounds. One of the challenges that we've really had to talk a lot about in the beginning were, how do our modern sensibilities line up with these things that are, date to the 1860s. If you open our manual and you see the opening and the closing of the Grange, which is a little 5-minute spiel that they do, it says the word God. And there was a lot of talk about that, especially, we're blessed that we have younger generations within our membership. And I think some of the feeling was, whether they were religious or not, there was a sense that it was, alienating for people that didn't feel that way. And everyone that came together around our Grange wanted it to feel open and welcome to everybody. And so, how do you do that? How do you keep something and just not water it down so much that it isn't what it was? And so one of the things that we're going to be trying is really bifurcating the meeting. So normally they would, get their staves and the gatekeeper would be at the door, and, you'd open the books and, say your words. What we want to do is, those that are interested in it, we've got to learn it first, because we don't know that language yet, right? So we have to learn how to do it and where I'm supposed to stand and when I'm supposed to hit my gavel. But also, do we do that piece first, and then people can join the rest of the meeting after, because they are working meetings where you have an agenda and old business and new business. So, that's kind of a sweet spot where we found that we could respect the history. It's like what it said on a Grateful Dead t-shirt I read once: believe it if you need it and leave it if you don't. For those that want it and want to keep it alive, they can join. And if they don't have to. It's not the price of entry into being a Grange member, but it's there for people that enjoy it. And the other thing, so the word God was one thing. One of the other things that the National Grange has been wrestling with, and it's more of a point of clarity, but even the language of, the master and the president is the master and the vice president is the overseer, and in this country, that language comes with a lot of connotation. Now, where it came from was actually England. So it really didn't have anything to do with our history here, but there's definitely, people don't even use master bedroom sometimes any longer. So they've modernized that. And so now, old school, we still call me the master of the Grange. I can't say I didn't like the idea of, being a master there with my gavel, but the reality is more and more you hear people call vice president and vice president. So there really is this effort to focus in on those things that are sticking points for helping to keep the organization alive through the generations. Another challenge is our building, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So she was built in 1914. There hasn't been a lot done to her since then. There was this, we have a 2-seater outhouse. So we were very fancy even back in the day. Very bougie Redding with our 2-seater. And a septic system was put in, I think, in the 70s. I actually found an article where they were doing a fundraiser to raise money for a new bathroom. So there definitely is some updates that need to happen. We put in a grant for ARPA. For anyone who knows what those are, it's this federal money that came to towns to help them become more resilient during COVID. And the way that our town handled it was letting nonprofits put in an application to explain how they can help the town more if they receive funding. And what we wanted to do was to bring the building back online to help share it with other nonprofits that didn't have a place to meet. So the Girl Scouts reached out, they're eager to meet, the Boy Scouts. So we're hoping for anyone that's going to be voting on October 20th, there is a line item in there that would give us a handicap accessible bathroom. It would give us air conditioning so we can make plans during the summer, and it would upgrade our electric so we don't burn the building down. So please vote for a non-burnt Grange Hall. Thank you very much. And then the other thing is the scale of the activity that we have there. Because it's a small parking lot. Again, I joked about, couldn't they have donated more land? I'm sure the horses took up less space. It's funny, one of the articles actually talked about some kind of stable. So now I want to go out there with my metal detector and see if I can find horseshoes. But the scale of it, we're never going to be the largest kid on the block for various reasons. So it's just another thing that we have to work around when everyone's very excited to have a building. It's not a clown car. We won't be able, I think once a year we can get away with blowing it up with our agricultural fair, but other than that, we have to kind of color in the lines. And next, this was something that came out that we wanted to follow up with on our for next steps for us. So when I did that survey, going back to agriculture and knowing our 2-acre zoning, and again, really feeling the reverberations of COVID and what happened when the stores closed down. There was some talk about, do we put a farmer's market in there? How important is it for Redding to be self-sustaining? That's what you're looking at. What I was feeling, and everybody said either very important or somewhat, but one of the things that we're toying with is this idea of doing a mass survey of the whole town to find out who grows what and when, and can we kind of crowdsource some kind of virtual co-op where we can work sort of an orchestration. So food in town is being shared where needed or filled in. Do we have enough crops in the fall if we wanted to make sure that we could take care of our 9,000 people? So it's one of the things that we'll probably circle back to see if we can have some traction on, taking advantage of all of these, not only our farms, but our local gardeners that are growing this and that. Who's growing garlic? Who's got rutabaga? What don't we have? There are crops of apples that grow in the fall. Does it make sense for someone to maybe think about planting those? Could you go online and order from your neighbors and then have it dropped off at the Grange Hall to pick up? So it's one of those things that we're thinking about. Again, what can we do with the scale of the building that's in line with the history of our agricultural richness in our town? And then our fair. So this is coming up on October 20th, and I've juxtaposed it with an article, and we were laughing about this last night.
The 23rd.
Yep. So so there have been ag fairs in this town. We were laughing because we called ours a fun size ag fair because our building is so small. We don't want people to think they're walking into Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus when we're 1,200 square feet. But it was funny to see that back in 1974 they were calling a mini fair. And I'm looking at names. I'm just looking here at Lucy Steitzel, and Nina Steitzel's one of our members of our Grange. And one of these articles, I don't know if it's this one, I can't see, but it actually talked about when the things needed to be dropped off. So our committee was like, we should have just read the articles from 1974 and we would have known how to do this all without having to make it up ourselves. So what we did was, again, thinking back to that picture of that black and white, pumpkin sitting there, we really tried to put a bit of a modern spin on it. So it's October 23rd. It's Sunday. It's 11 to 3. If you wanted to enter something, it's just walk in. You don't have to register. Apparently, that's how ag fairs go, although it makes me very nervous. So we have a chicken beauty contest. We have most impressive garden produce. We have best overalls or farm costume. We made up a category called best corn something because we wanted to challenge our neighbors to think about something creative. Whether it be cornbread. I think I used you could train mice and teach them to juggle kernels of corn as an example. We don't know what's going to come. Best family recipe cookies, weirdest pumpkin, and best farm-esque art. And so it really is our way of how do we take something old and historic and make it kind of new and fresh and fun. So I hope that anybody on this call will think about going into their closet and dragging out something between 10 and 11 and just bringing it down on Sunday to enter into our fair and help participate. It's going to be a lot of fun. Lori, before I switch slides, is there anything else you wanted to say about the Ag Fair?
I think it's going to be a hoot, and I think people who don't come will be like, oh darn, I missed that.
Lori is one of our co-chairs, and it was great when we had a meeting. She went into one of her books and she pulled out, a little tattered Redding Grange fair ribbon that she had for many, many years. And so it was part of our fun. Bill Hill is co-chair, and Karen Staff and Leslie Bearwin are also on the committee, and just the fun of making new Redding Grange ribbons to carry on the tradition in our town that's been going on for so long. So learning together, I think this is really where, when I interface with the State Grange, who they're the kindest people. They're so dedicated. I think anybody that was in that room in November was just completely blown away that they could recite this pages and pages and pages of this ritual without even looking at notes. They're that dedicated to it. Just how do we metabolize these historic pieces and update it without adulterating the core of Grange? And that's really, I think, what the matter at hand now, and the matter at hand for not only our Grange, but I would argue for the National Grange, who really has to think about its future in a very competitive, crowded space. Back in the day, giving out dictionaries to school children, there was an article in 2009, was, enough to be a backbone of an organization. Now there's so much out there. So you really have to make sure that you've got relevancy. The one thing I can tell you in reading through all of these articles is we had a cohort of people in this town that have been fighting to keep this ball up in the air or this, keep the baton moving forward since 1875. And it's just so interesting to read that every time it almost snuffed out that there was a group that raised their hand to keep it moving forward. And I just feel very privileged to be in a position to have helped do that one more time. So, and so I'll end the story with really just that. We have a newsletter that comes out from the State Grange, and I read that Wallingford Grange had just turned in their charter. And unlike last year, this year, I actually know what that means. And so I called the State Grange and I said, okay, what's going on? Is this building falling down like Bridgewater's issues, or, and they said, no, it's actually I didn't want to keep this too long, but the inside, it's got all this beautiful, and I didn't want to embarrass our own Grange, what looks kind of paltry compared to their Grange, but it had like mahogany all over the walls, and it was just 2 floors and a giant commercial kitchen. I walked in and I was like, oh my God, I have Grange envy. And I said, what happened? And really what happens is these organizations, these fraternal orders, membership, unless they're really on their toes, ages out, or they get tired because only a small group of them are carrying much of the water. And I said to them, I said, if you want me to try and go and talk to Wallingford, I've never been to Wallingford, but I guarantee you this one thing I know, people in that town have no idea what's happening. And so I drove up to Wallingford 2 weeks ago. I just put up a Facebook page. I walk into the library and I get all choked up. There's 20 people there just asking how they can save their hole. And I'm like, well, I only need 13 of you. So they sign their forms. And so it looks like Wallingford Grange, they're so excited about it. They have big dreams and are learning all about the National Grange, just like we were a year ago. So that's all I have to tell you. And I'm sorry if there's more trials and tribulations about National Grange that you wanted to hear, but that's basically all I know. So I'll stop sharing the screen and see if anybody has any questions.
Elizabeth, thank you. I mean, it's such a sleepy little treasure, I think, in Redding, the Grange. And so you've really informed us and given us some of that rich history, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And
is the Grange mainly Redding, or is it open to outsiders, quote unquote?
Yes, you can join from anywhere. And it's actually a very good question, because one of the things that I found and have heard is that sometimes when the Granges struggle, it's because most of the members don't live in that town. And that was the truth about our Grange. When it closed, there were only a handful of the existing members that actually lived in Redding. So you can join, and in fact, as a Grange member, you can join, you can be a member of 2 Granges. You can belong to your home Grange, and you can be an affiliate of a second Grange. So I will probably become an affiliate of Wallingford Grange, because now I'm emotionally invested. So the answer to your question is yes, you can live anywhere and become a member of Grange, but it does seem to be a correlation between a local community's members being a member of their Grange with that Grange being stronger.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. We have about 70 members now.
It's amazing how quickly you've grown. Does anyone have tales too? Has anyone here been to the Grange or have a life experience there?
Well, I definitely hear tales. I remember when I first met Nina Steitzel, she was telling me when she was a young girl how she won her first Grange ribbon for baking some kind of bread. And Barrett Cram, who does septic, was doing a septic inspection on us, and he was telling me how he used to ride his bike from very far away and, you know, do wheelings in the parking lot. So it's interesting that the stories that you stumble into as you talk to people in town and what they remember of that little building.
And we were members because we live nearby, such that my son could go and pretend that he had, you know, the best egg or the biggest egg or whatever, which is how we got ribbons. But it was, you know, it was an aged group 25 years ago. You know, it was an older crowd, and it was worrisome when we stopped getting, you know, the Grange mailer, and then suddenly there were just no people there, you know, over time. So I'm so delighted that this youthful gang got together last November and regenerated what is a really cool thing to have in town, I think.
Hi, I've got Laura Schuler. I have a question. What are your plans? What kind of events are you looking to do in the coming year?
Yeah, that's a really
You started all this, and now what?
exactly. Now what? So it's a really great question. And I think one of the things in talking to our zoning department is existing use. So we are being respectful for the fact that we live in, our building was built pre any zoning that existed here in town, but we do have neighbors around us. So I do think there's always going to be a piece of us that's going to want to make sure that we are good neighbors and not just have a raucous event at the Grange Hall every night of the week. There's a couple of things that have been really coming on strong. So one of the first things we did was a seed exchange. And so we plan to do that every year, just a seed swap. People brought in seeds or picked up seeds from their that they had too many of. It was actually the first time I met Hugh Carricker in town, who recently passed away. He had come to the seed exchange. We do once at the changing of the seasons. Again, the seasons are such a big part of Grange culture that we do. Basically, it's an open house. It's a welcoming of the season on the day of the change of the season. So none of this the next weekend. It's like a mini, you know, New Year, you know, every quarter that we get together to do that. The next one's on December 21st. So we'll be getting together, and it's an open house. People can come, people can bring friends. We are looking at that virtual co-op piece to see if we can build that out. And just smaller events. You know, we were talking about Egg Week in the spring. There's so many people that love chickens here. So could we do, again, judges of eggs, or coming, you know, do we have an omelet tasting? So that's one of the things that we look forward to doing. So you're going to see us active around the seasons and really kind of, you know, beekeeping. We have 7 vendors coming to our little ag fair, and we had 3 beekeepers pop up. So there's a lot of beekeepers here in town. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. There is other things that we want to push out to, you know, many Granges pay their bills by renting out their halls. Again, we have to be careful about that. But there's some talk of our local musicians wanting an open mic night there that we're kind of feeling our way through. There also is a long tradition of like craft fairs. There is a lot of craft fairs and, yard sale type things going on there. So one of the things we're looking at is Susan Winters was interested in bringing online one of those in time for December, and maybe some farm theme ones as well. One of the things that we have to be mindful is who wants to do what. Again, this is one of those things where people will have great ideas, but unless they're actually willing to be the ones to do it, you can burn out the few members that are doing the work ahead of time. So one of the things we're looking at is what do we want to do and who actually is going to do it. So those are kind of the two lenses that we're looking through.
Yeah, Elizabeth, this is Dick Emerson. Back in the 70s, they had regular pancake breakfasts at that building, and they used those to raise money to, I assume, to pay for their other events. But I went to a number of those, and I'm sure you've heard about them. But
Yes, I did. And it was actually one of the last questions I asked Doug Hartline when he was getting from our Department of Health before he was getting ready to retire. I'm like, so do we have any issues if we have a pancake breakfast or dinner? They had, the answer is, yeah, we're hoping to bring those back online. There are certain things that we have to do. I think, I don't know how many rules were followed back then, but we're trying to be disciplined about making sure we follow modern rules. So yeah, absolutely. We're hoping to bring those back as well.
great.
Who's coming to the Ag Fair? Anybody? Elaine, you must have a corn something you can bring.
I've been thinking about that. I'm not sure what it would be, but it's intriguing. Sounds like fun. So I hope everybody will be there. I think it'll be a great way to welcome the Grange back into our community.
Fingers crossed.
So, hi, this is Andrew. I'm just curious, what's the next step for someone who might be interested in joining?
Thank you. Yes, new members are always welcome. If you can just email me at community@reddinggrange.org, I can send you a membership slip. We are looking at our dues, but right now to become a member, it's $35 a year.
Okay. And that email address again, I'm sorry.
community@reddinggrange.org.
Okay,
And then you have to go through one of these ceremonies.
okay.
That's the deal. We all did it.
I mean, it certainly sounds like it's going to be the place to be.
It's going to be the place to be. I'm telling you, it's going to be the hottest ticket in town, this Grange Fair.
Any other questions for Elizabeth?
Where does everyone park? That's a good question, Bev. So at this point, we haven't really had many events that overflowed too badly. The Boys and Girls Club have been very kind to share their parking lot. It's a 6-minute walk from us. So those that are feeling spry on that day, I need to get my steps in anyway, we'll park down there and walk over. For the Ag Fair, we've actually been cozying up to our neighbors to warn them about it. We bought pylons to put on a few of the edges of their lawns. Some of them are like, just park on our, park on the edge of our grass. So it's going to be a little bit of an overflow. Knock on wood, we have attendance for the Ag Fair, but in general, we try to fit it at our hall. We can fit, if we're all cozy and don't mind moving cars, we can actually wiggle in about 15 cars on the one side and maybe about 3 on the other. So if you have that, maybe 1 or 2 others kind of, sticking out a little bit. And then if we do something big, have it at the Boys and Girls Club, it seems to have been working for us.
Do you have handicap parking?
We actually don't have it designated, but we do have places up front where people don't park, and we will probably put signage there when we have events. Yes. Yeah.
Good idea. Carpool.
Carpool. Someone is asking, I just lost it in chat. Someone is asking, oh, if there'll be a membership table at the fair. It's a really great question. Yes, the fair is going to be a great time to come down if you're curious about the hall to take a look at it. We'll have a little lipstick on her that day, so she'll hopefully will look kind of pretty. And yes, and we'll absolutely have memberships there. We're gonna have a raffle of all the vendors there are Reading neighbors. All the raffle items were donated by people in Reading. All the baked goods are baked by your Reading neighbors. So it's going to be really cute.
And the contests are hotly contested.
Right.
Some of them. Chickens and cookies are really tough categories, you know?
Does everyone need to have their item there at a certain time? Do you need to have it there when you open?
Between 10 and 11, because judging starts at 11 o'clock.
Okay,
And we have some celebrity judges, honest to gosh.
that's exciting.
Yeah, we have like a little bitty art category, farm-esque art. Guess who's going to be judging that? Any James Grasho, Jimmy Grasho.
That's exciting. Oh,
And
wonderful.
guess who's going to be judging the cookies? Little Birdie, the owner of Little Birdie Cookies, who everybody loves.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So much, not only the history of that building, but just getting to know the community better and seeing who's here and what everybody brings to the table. It's literally been one of the best things I've ever done.
You've
Even though I
really
didn't know what I was doing.
We pulled together some very nice different components, you know, that'll make it, I think, very up to date. So
Thank you.
sounds like fun.
Well, again, the email, we have a Facebook page. It was one of the first things we set up. We are just finalizing. If anybody wants to sponsor the fair, I can send information. We're just finalizing some recognition pieces. If anybody's, we have sponsorship starting at $50 that will help pay to heat that building in the winter. So certainly, again, community@reddinggrange.org. Or if you just want some of these articles, some of these historic things, if you think they'd be fun to read about Mark Twain and Redding Grange in 1909, I'd be happy to share them out.